My father looked me in the eye and said, "You're 28, be an adult." And while he was literally signing the papers for a $50,000 boat. He told me my inability to walk was a lesson in financial responsibility. My sister told me to sell my laptop, and my mother just smiled and walked away. Only my brother, a mechanic who barely makes rent, came through. He sold his tools just to give me $500. He cried because it wasn't enough. What they didn't know is that I'm the architect of the very medical group that just approved their yacht insurance. In 10 minutes, I'm executing a surgical strike on their luxury life. By tonight, they'll be the ones begging for a lesson in mercy. The medical shock of the diagnosis hadn't hit me as hard as the sound of my father's laughter echoing through the marble foyer. I sat in my wheelchair, clutching the $4,500 itemized bill for the reconstructive surgery. I needed to walk again, while my parents huddled around a glossy brochure for a 40-foot luxury yacht. They were discussing the custom leather, upholstery, and the high-end navigation system as if I weren't even in the room. To them, I was just a ghost, in the hallway of their perfect life, an inconvenient reminder of a daughter who was broken. "Dad, please," I whispered, my voice a desperate plea that finally cut through their excitement. "The doctor says if I don't get this surgery in the next 30 days, the nerve damage will be permanent. I won't be able to walk. It's only $4,500. That's less than the deposit you just put on that boat." My father didn't even look up from the brochure. He just let out a long, weary sigh, as if my health was a burden on his weekend plans. "You're 28, Elena. Be an adult. We've spent your whole life providing for you. If you want this surgery, find a way to pay for it. Consider this a lesson in financial responsibility." "A lesson?" I gasped, the cruelty of his words stinging more than the pain in my legs. "You just bought a luxury vessel. How can you talk about responsibility while you're ignoring your own daughter's surgery?" My mother finally looked at me, her smile tight and approving of my father's harshness. "Your father is right, Elena. We've already committed to the yacht. It's a major status move for our social circle. You're always asking for something. Why don't you sell your laptop? Be the architect of your own recovery for once." My sister walked into the room, scrolling through her phone with an air of smug superiority. She didn't even glance at my wheelchair. "Honestly, Elena, your constant complaining is ruining the mood. Just get a loan. You're acting like a loser begging for scraps." I felt like a janitor in my own home, someone meant to clean up their messes but never allowed to sit at the table. They were treating my life like a debt they were happy to ignore. But as they walked away, laughing about which marina was best for the new boat's name, the silent architect inside me finally woke up. They had no idea what I was hiding. They saw a ghost in a wheelchair, but they didn't know that. I had been quietly building a career they couldn't even imagine. For the last 5 years, while I worked remotely, I had actually been the lead strategic auditor for the very firm that handled their luxury assets and insurance. I knew every detail of their bank accounts, every hidden debt, and exactly how they had manipulated funds to buy that boat. I had been testing them. I wanted to see if their love was real or if they were just ghosts in expensive clothes. The answer was absolute. Just then, my brother Leo walked in. He was a mechanic, covered in grease, smelling of oil and hard work. He knelt beside my chair, his eyes filled with a recognition I hadn't seen in the others. "I heard them, Elena," he whispered, his voice cracking. He pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket. "I sold my tools. All of them. I can't work for a while, but here is $500. It's not enough, but I won't let you stay like this." I looked at the $500, the sacrifice of a brother they treated like a loser, and then at the yacht brochure on the floor. The status flip was about to begin. "Thank you, Leo," I said, a calm taking over my heart. "Keep your money. You're going to need it to buy a new shop when I'm done with them." I'm taking my hands off the wheel they never learned to drive. The medical shock of my family's indifference settled into a cold, hard resolution within my soul. While the pain in my legs remained a constant surgical strike against my nerves, the glow of the upcoming yacht launch party seemed to be the only thing keeping my mother and father alive. They had spent the entire week transformed into architects of vanity, inviting every sovereign member of the local country club to witness their latest executive package acquisition. They hadn't checked on me once. Instead, they had moved my wheelchair into the small guest room in the back hallway so that I wouldn't ruin the social mask of their perfect evening. As the party began, the ghost of my presence was exactly what they wanted. I could hear the sovereign clinking of crystal glasses and the powerful boss laughter of my father as he stood on the deck of his new boat, which was currently docked at the private pier behind our estate. My sister Sarah was the architect of the humiliation that night, parading around in a dress that cost more than my monthly rent, acting as the vantage point for every jealous eye in the crowd. "Did you hear about Elena's lesson?" I heard Sarah's voice drift through the open window. A surgical strike of mockery intended for her wealthy friends. She actually thought Dad was going to pause his executive package lifestyle to pay for a surgery she could easily afford if she weren't so lazy. It's a status flip for her, going from the pampered daughter to the family janitor. She's currently sulking in the back, probably trying to figure out how to sell her laptop for $4,500. The medical shock of her cruelty was met with a mirror paradox of laughter from the crowd. My father then took the microphone, his voice booming with the glow of a man who thought he was untouchable. "Friends, look at this vessel," my father toasted, his arm sweeping toward the yacht he called the Sovereign Debt. "This boat represents the resolution of years of hard work. And yes, it's true what you've heard. We've had to make some executive package sacrifices this month. But as I told my daughter, you can't have a vantage point over the ocean if you're always stuck in the medical shock of the past. She's learning to be an adult, and I'm learning that the glow of the sea is much more rewarding than the surgical strike of a hospital bill." He was gloating about my permanent foreclosure from a normal life, as if it were a funny anecdote for a dinner party. My mother nodded along, her social mask glowing with the satisfaction of a powerful boss who had successfully status flipped her own daughter into a cautionary tale. They truly believed that by denying me medical care, they were teaching me the ultimate lesson in survival, when in reality, they were just exposing their own lack of humanity. They didn't know that while they were enjoying the glow of the party, I was sitting in the shadows of the guest room, my secret power finally fully charged. I had my laptop open, the same one Sarah told me to sell, and I was deep into the resolution of their financial destruction. As a lead auditor for the firm that managed their executive package insurance, I had just discovered the mirror paradox of their boat purchase. They hadn't used their own savings. They had used the sovereign trust fund that my grandfather had set up specifically for my medical shock emergencies. My father had forged my signature on a surgical strike of a document to execute the status flip of the funds. He thought I was too much of a ghost to ever check the vantage point of that account. He thought I was just a janitor who wouldn't notice the permanent foreclosure on my own inheritance while I struggled to walk. "Enjoy the executive package while it lasts, Dad," I whispered to the screen as I hit submit on a formal audit surgical strike to the board of directors. The resolution you're celebrating is about to become a permanent foreclosure on your freedom. I watched through the window as they laughed on the deck, the glow of the party lights illuminating their social mask of success. They were so busy gloating about my janitor status that they didn't see the architect of their ruin sitting right behind them. Leo had been right. They were ghosts in expensive suits. And the medical shock they were about to receive would be the most expensive lesson they ever had to learn. By the time the last sovereign guest left, the status flip would be irreversible. They wanted me to sell my laptop to pay for my life. Instead, I used it to sign the permanent foreclosure on their executive package dreams. The medical shock of the evening reached its peak just as the glow of the party lanterns began to flicker against the rising tide. My father was in the middle of a powerful boss speech, boasting to the local bank president about the vantage point his new yacht provided for high-stakes networking. He stood on the deck of the Sovereign Debt, and a glass of vintage champagne in one hand and his social mask of success firmly in place. He had no idea that I had rolled my wheelchair out onto the pier, the architect finally stepping out of the shadows to execute the surgical strike. I had spent all evening preparing. "Dad, I think you forgot to mention one executive package detail in your toast," I said, my voice cutting through the sovereign laughter of the crowd like a cold wind. The party went silent. My mother's social mask tightened as she looked at me with a medical shock of embarrassment. Sarah stepped forward, her face a mirror paradox of rage. "Elena, get back to the guest room. she hissed. You're ruining the glow of the launch. Nobody wants to see a janitor in a wheelchair right now when we are celebrating a win. Oh, I'm not here as the janitor tonight. Sarah, I replied, a sovereign calm in my tone. I held up my laptop, the screen glowing with the resolution of the audit I had just finalized. I'm here as the senior risk architect for the equity group. You know, the firm that manages the executive package. Insurance for everyone on this pier. My father's face went from the glow of triumph to a medical shock of pale white. He looked at the bank president, then back at me. Elena, what surgical strike of a game are you playing? He stammered, his powerful boss voice cracking. It's not a game, Dad. It's a status flip, I said, my voice gaining strength. You told me to be an architect of my own recovery. You told me to find a vantage point on my own finances, because I was 28 and needed to grow up. So I did. While you were busy buying this yacht, I was busy auditing the permanent foreclosure. You just executed on your own future. I hit a key on my laptop, and a resolution alert chimed on the phones of several people in the crowd, specifically the board members of the yacht club. I've flagged the sovereign trust fund account for fraudulent activity. I have the mirror paradox of the forged signature you used to pull my medical shock. Emergency funds to pay for this deck. And because I'm the architect in charge of this regional audit, the permanent foreclosure on your executive package lifestyle has already been signed. The medical shock among the guests was absolute. My mother looked like she was standing in the hallway of her own nightmare. Just as Sarah tried to launch another surgical strike of insults, 2 black sedans pulled into the driveway. The secret power of the law had arrived. Mr. Sterling, one of the men said, walking onto the pier with a sovereign authority. We are from the Financial Crimes Division. We have a resolution for an immediate freeze on all assets associated with this executive package estate, following a surgical strike report of trust fund embezzlement. My father looked at the yacht, his vantage point of success, and then at the handcuffs. He had tried to treat me like street garbage, a ghost he could ignore while he lived his sovereign fantasy. He didn't realize that the janitor he mocked was actually the architect who held the keys to his permanent foreclosure. You destroyed the glow of our family, Sarah screamed, her social mask completely gone, revealing the mirror paradox of her ugliness. No, Sarah, I said, watching as the officers led our father away from his executive package toy. I just brought the resolution to a lie. You wanted me to sell my laptop to pay for my surgery because I was a loser? I used it to save my life and execute a status flip on yours. Leo stepped out from behind the crowd, a glow of pride on his grease-stained face. He walked over and took the handles of my wheelchair. I think it's time for the janitors to leave the party. Elena, he whispered. Not just leave, Leo, I replied, looking at the permanent foreclosure notice on the boat. We're going to be the architects of something much bigger now. The medical shock of the evening was finally over, but the resolution was just beginning. My father had lost his vantage point. My mother had lost her social mask, and I had finally found my secret power. The medical shock of the pierside arrest had completely drained the glow from my mother's social mask, leaving her looking like a ghost in her own executive package gown. As the police led my father away, the party guests, the very people who had been laughing at my lesson in financial responsibility, began to execute a surgical strike of their own, scurrying away from the permanent foreclosure of my family's reputation. I sat in my wheelchair, feeling a sovereign sense of calm as the architect of this new reality. The mirror paradox was finally clear. The people who called me street garbage and a loser were now the ones standing in the wreckage of a status flip they never saw coming. Elena, how could you do this to your own father? My mother hissed, her voice a surgical strike of desperation as she stood in the hallway of the darkened pier. You've ruined our vantage point in this community. You've turned us into janitors of a scandal. I didn't ruin anything, Mom, I replied, my voice a resolution of icy strength. Dad ruined it the moment he decided my ability to walk was less important than the glow of a luxury boat. He wanted me to be an architect of my own life and be an adult, remember? Well, I've just designed a new executive package for our family. It's called accountability. Sarah tried to step forward, her face a mirror paradox of tears and rage. You're a monster. You've put a permanent foreclosure on my entire future. I had an executive package lifestyle planned, and now the accounts are frozen. Your future was funded by the same sovereign trust fund Dad embezzled from. Sarah, I said, hitting a final key on my laptop to finalize the status flip. The same one that was meant for my surgery. Consider your financial ruin. The first lesson in the architect's curriculum. The next morning, the medical shock intensified for them. I arrived at the marina, but I wasn't in a wheelchair. Using my secret power as a senior risk architect, I had fast-tracked a surgical strike on my own medical claim, using the recovered funds to pay for an emergency procedure that stabilized my nerves. I walked down the pier, my steps a sovereign declaration of my returned power. Standing in front of the sovereign debt yacht were my mother and Sarah, who were currently being blocked by a janitor, security guard as they tried to retrieve executive package items from the deck. "You can't be walking," Sarah screamed, her medical shock turning into pure mirror paradox disbelief. "You were faking it. You just wanted to execute a surgical strike on our happiness." "I wasn't faking, Sarah. I was waiting for the architect to have the right vantage point," I said, handing a resolution document to the security guard. "As part of the final settlement for the trust fund theft, this yacht has undergone a permanent foreclosure from Dad's name. It now belongs to the medical foundation I represent." My mother's social mask completely crumbled. "What are you going to do with it?" "I'm turning it into a mobile clinic for the people you and Dad used to treat like street garbage and losers," I said, a glow of pride in my voice. "While you're sitting in the hallway of a public hearing, this boat will be providing the medical shock of free care to those who actually deserve it." The status flip is complete. As I boarded the yacht, I looked back at them. Two ghosts of a life built on stolen vantage points. I was the sovereign now. The janitor had become the architect, and the powerful bosses were finally learning what it felt like to be left in the rain. The medical shock of the Sterling family's total collapse became the sovereign topic of every gossip column in the city. While I stood on the deck of my new mobile clinic, feeling the glow of the morning sun and the strength in my own legs, my sister Sarah was experiencing a permanent foreclosure on her social identity. Her fiancé, a man who viewed relationships as an executive package transaction, had already executed a surgical strike on their engagement the moment the news of the embezzlement broke. He didn't want a ghost for a bride, someone whose father was heading to prison, and whose vantage point had shifted from a penthouse to a public defender's hallway. I watched from across the street as Sarah stood outside the frozen executive package wedding venue, her social mask completely shattered as she argued with the manager who was barring her entry. "You can't cancel the sovereign ballroom," she screamed, her voice a medical shock of desperation to the passers-by. "I am a Sterling. This is just a temporary status flip. My father will fix this." The manager didn't even blink. He just handed her a resolution document stating the cancellation policy. "The Sterling accounts are under permanent foreclosure by the state auditors. You are no longer a powerful boss here, Miss Sterling. You're just a janitor of your own debts now." The financial ruin was absolute. My mother had moved into a small, cramped apartment, her executive package, jewelry having been seized as part of the surgical strike to repay the stolen trust funds. She spent her days in a state of medical shock, staring at the mirror paradox of her empty life. She had treated me like street garbage to protect her vantage point, and now she was the one living in the hallway of a life she didn't recognize. But amidst their resolution of ruin, I was busy being the architect of a different kind of future. I drove down to the hallway of a dusty, rundown industrial district to find Leo. He was working out of the back of a beat-up truck, trying to fix a client's engine, without the sovereign tools he had sold to try and help me walk. He looked like a ghost of the man he used to be, but his resolution was still pure. "Leo!" I called out, stepping into the glow of his workspace. He wiped the grease from his forehead, a medical shock of surprise on his face as he saw me, walking toward him without the wheelchair. "Elena, you look like a sovereign queen." "I look like a sister who pays her debts, Leo," I said, handing him a set of executive package keys. "The architect has been busy. I've just executed a status flip on that garage across the street, the one with the vantage point over the main highway. It's yours. All the sovereign tools, the executive package diagnostic equipment, and a 5-year resolution on the lease are paid in full. Leo stared at the keys in medical shock. Elena, I can't take this. I only gave you 500. You gave me your secret power when I was a ghost and a loser. To everyone else, Leo, I said, my voice a surgical strike of love. While Dad and Mom were busy with permanent foreclosures on my life, you were the only one who acted like an architect of my survival. This isn't a gift. It's your resolution for being a sovereign human being. The financial ruin of the Sterling name was the best thing that ever happened to us. It cleared out the ghosts and the janitors of our past, leaving only the architects who were willing to build something real. As I watched Leo open the doors to his new executive package shop, I knew the status flip was finally complete. I was no longer street garbage in a wheelchair, and he was no longer a janitor in the shadows. We were the sovereigns of our own lives. The medical shock of the wood-paneled courtroom felt like a sovereign sanctuary, compared to the hallway of broken dreams I had lived in for years. Today was the resolution of my father's executive package of lies. I walked into the room, my steps firm and audible, surgical strike against the silence, and took my seat in the front row. When my father was let in, wearing a standard-issue jumpsuit instead of his sovereign Italian silk, the medical shock on his face was the ultimate status flip. He looked at me, walking, breathing, and radiating a glow he couldn't extinguish, and he finally looked like the ghost he had tried to make me. The prosecutor called me to the stand as the architect of the investigation. I didn't look at my mother or Sarah, who sat in the back like street garbage waiting to be cleared away. I looked directly at the man who thought a yacht was worth more than his daughter's future. Mr. Sterling didn't just commit a surgical strike on a bank account, I testified, my voice a sovereign bell of truth. He executed a permanent foreclosure on the trust his own father built to protect his children. He used his vantage point as a parent to treat me like a janitor of his secrets, while he lived an executive package life on stolen time. My father stood up, his social mask completely shattered. I did it for the family, Elena. To maintain our status, he yelled, a medical shock of desperation in his eyes. You did it for the mirror paradox of your own ego, I countered, my voice a surgical strike that silenced the room. A sovereign leader protects his own. He doesn't leave them in a hallway of pain because a boat looks better in the driveway. You wanted me to be an adult and learn a lesson? Well, the architect is here to give you the final grade. I handed the judge a resolution document, the final audit of his executive package of offshore accounts. It wasn't just the yacht money. He had been executing a surgical strike on the family's wealth for a decade. The judge nodded. A permanent foreclosure on my father's freedom officially beginning. 10 years, the judge announced, the medical shock of the sentence rippling through the room, and a sovereign order for the total liquidation of all assets to pay back the victims, starting with the medical foundation Elena represents. As they led him away, my mother tried to catch my eye, her social mask wet with tears. Sarah just stared at the floor, a ghost of the girl who once mocked my disability. They were now the janitors of a ruined name, left to clean up a mirror paradox they helped create. I walked out of that courthouse and found Leo waiting by his new executive package service truck. He didn't say anything. He just opened the door for me, a sovereign gesture of respect. Where to, Elena? He asked, the glow of the afternoon sun reflecting off the new tools in his belt. To the vantage point, Leo, I said, looking toward the marina where my mobile clinic was docked. The architect has a lot of building to do, and for the first time, we aren't doing it in someone else's hallway. The ultimate justice wasn't the prison sentence or the money. It was the resolution of the ghost I used to be. I was finally the sovereign of my own story, and the status flip was permanent.